The gravy was still steaming when my mother smiled at me across the Christmas table and said the house was finally gone. "We closed on your grandma's place last month," she said, swirling her wine. "You were never in the will anyway." My sister laughed into her napkin. Good. She'd just have wasted it on that little office of hers. 11 faces turned to watch me crumble. I didn't. None of them knew the deed to that farmhouse already had a name on it, sitting in my purse beside my chair. And in about 90 seconds, that name was going to turn Christmas dinner into the quietest room in the county. My name is Clara Finch. I am 34 years old and I keep books for the farms around Cedar Hollow. To explain how I ended up at that table holding a deed, I have to go back almost a year. It was a Tuesday in February and I was reconciling dairy ledgers when the call came. My grandmother Rose had taken a bad turn in the night. I was the one they called. I was always the one they called. Not my mother Sharon, who lived 20 minutes across town. Not my sister Brooke, who lived even closer. Me. Because for 8 years I had been the one driving out to the farmhouse on Cedar Hollow Road, with her pills, her tax forms, her groceries, and a thermos of coffee for the long mornings. I closed the laptop, left a note on the office door, and drove out past the frozen fields. Rose was propped up in her bed when I got there, smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She held my hand for a while and didn't say much. Then she reached into the drawer of her nightstand and pressed a small key into my palm. It was the key to an old tin recipe box she had kept in the kitchen since before I was born. "When the time comes," she said, "you'll know where to look." I asked what she meant. She patted my hand and told me to drink my coffee before it went cold. I tucked the key into my coat pocket and didn't think much of it. That farmhouse was the only place I ever felt like I belonged. I grew up in town in my parents' tidy ranch house, where every conversation felt like a performance review. But summers I belonged to Rose. She taught me to snap beans on the porch and to read a feed bill so the co-op couldn't pad it. She would spread the farm's receipts across the kitchen table and let me add the columns out loud. "Numbers don't lie, Clara," she would say. "People do. So you learn the numbers." That kitchen was where I decided what I would be. I opened Clara Finch bookkeeping at 22 in a rented room above the hardware store, because my parents wouldn't help with college, and Rose slipped me her egg money to make rent. My mother thought it was beneath us. My sister thought it was boring. Rose thought it was the finest thing anyone in the family had ever done. While I was driving out there every week, my mother came twice a year, mostly to ask about the value of the land. Brooke came for holidays and left early. Rose said it plain one last good autumn, sitting in her garden with dirt under both our fingernails. She looked at the house, then at me, and said, "This place goes to the one who stayed." I laughed it off. I told her not to talk like that. She didn't argue. She just smiled the way she did when she knew something I didn't and went back to her tomatoes. Rose passed in her sleep 3 days after she gave me that key. I planned the entire funeral. I picked the hymns she liked, ordered the flowers, wrote the obituary, and stood at the door thanking neighbors who had known her 60 years. My mother Sharon wore black and accepted condolences like a queen receiving subjects. My father Raymond stood beside her and said almost nothing, which was his whole personality. Brooke spent the reception on her phone. Before the casseroles were even cold, my mother leaned over and asked what I thought the farmhouse would fetch. Then Brooke drifted through the house with her camera up, photographing the hutch, the quilts, the old grandfather clock, narrating prices under her breath like she was at an estate sale. Nobody asked who would feed Rose's old barn cat. They asked what it was worth. The hardest part started with a phone call about a will. In April, My cousin Vincent called a family meeting to read it. Vincent Hollis was my mother's side, a part-time notary who ran a tax and title shop to towns over and always smelled faintly of cigarettes and cologne. The meeting was not at a lawyer's office. It was at my parents' kitchen table with a coffee cake and a folder. That should have been my first clue. Vincent put on his reading glasses and announced that Rose had left everything, the house, the land, the accounts, to my mother, the devoted daughter-in-law, he read, who cared for me in my final years. My mother dabbed her eyes. Brooke squeezed her hand. My name was not in the document at all, not as a beneficiary, not as a witness, not even as a footnote. You were never in the will anyway, honey, my mother said, and there was the faintest curl at the corner of her mouth. I sat very still, but inside, two things were screaming at me. The first was that devoted daughter-in-law was a phrase Rose would have rather choked on than written. She and my mother had circled each other like cats for 30 years. The second was the signature. I had seen my grandmother sign 100 documents. This signature was careful, even steady. The Rose I had buried couldn't hold a spoon in those last weeks, let alone sign her name clean. And the date at the bottom said this will was made just 3 weeks before she died. 3 weeks. I didn't say any of that out loud. I thanked Vincent for his time, took a slice of coffee cake I didn't eat, and drove back to my office with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind doing arithmetic. 2 years earlier I had driven Rose to an attorney's office in the county seat. She told me she was getting her affairs in order and made me wait in the lobby, which was very like her. She came out an hour later with a sealed envelope and a business card she tucked into her purse. I never saw the documents, but I knew they existed. So how did a will drafted with a real estate attorney 2 years ago become a will notarized by Vincent 3 weeks before she died? Vincent hadn't set foot at the farmhouse. I would have known. I called him the next morning and asked plainly when exactly Rose had signed the new will. He got vague fast. She had me come by, he said. Last minute change of heart. Happens all the time. I asked who witnessed it. He said he'd have to check his file. A notary who has to check whether anyone witnessed a will is a notary telling you something. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there a long time looking at the corner of my desk where I keep the things I can't throw away. And I remembered the business card. 2 years ago in the lobby, Rose had pressed a card into my hand just in case. I had filed it without a second thought. Patricia Howe, estate law. Before I called the lawyer, I did the reasonable thing. I asked my own family for the truth. My mother's whole face changed. Why would you need that? I told her I just wanted to read it. I keep books. Reading documents is what I do. She made herself the victim. I cannot believe you, she said, her voice wobbling. Your grandmother is barely in the ground and you're already fighting about money. Brooke appeared in the doorway right on cue. Don't make this ugly, Clara. It's so like you to make everything about you. My father studied the wallpaper. I looked at the 3 of them and understood something I should have understood years ago. They weren't confused. They had a plan, and the plan required me quiet and ashamed and gone. So I went quiet, but not the way they wanted. They thought the bookish daughter would fold because she always folded. What they forgot is what I actually do for a living. I spend my days finding the number somebody tried very hard to hide. And there was a date that didn't line up, sitting in a will my cousin couldn't explain. Patricia Howe's assistant put me through the moment I said my grandmother's name. Patricia was careful on the phone, the way good lawyers are, and asked me to come in person. In the meantime, I did what I always do when I'm scared. I gathered facts. The estate was already moving fast. to fast. My mother had petitioned the court as executor under an informal, uncontested probate, the kind that moves quickly when nobody stands up to object. The required notice to family had gone to an old mailing address I had left years back, so it reached me late, after the easy window to object had nearly closed. Patricia never heard a word because nobody is obligated to notify the attorney who drafted an earlier will. A notice arrived that the farmhouse and land would be sold to settle the estate. I drove out to Cedar Hollow Road that evening and parked at the end of the long gravel drive. The house sat there in the blue dusk, Rose's porch swing still hanging crooked the way it always had. I thought about strangers walking those rooms. I thought about someone tearing out her garden to put in a pool. And I made myself a promise right there in the cold. Whatever the law eventually said about that forged signature, it would take months to prove. And the house would be long gone by then. I couldn't stop the sale in time, but there was nothing stopping me from being the one who bought it. I formed a company, not because I am cloak and dagger, but because I needed to bid on that house without my mother seeing my name and driving up the price out of spite. I registered a limited liability company called Cedar Hollow Holdings on the public records. Only the company name would show. My family, scanning the auction paperwork, would just see a company they had never heard of. They would never connect it to the daughter they had written off. Then came the harder part, money. The farmhouse and 10 acres had been appraised around to $115,000. Not a fortune in the city, but a mountain when you keep books above a hardware store. I had been careful for 12 years, though. I had real savings in the business. I had a small inheritance from my grandfather that I had never touched, because Rose told me to save it for something that mattered. And I qualified for a mortgage in the company's name to cover the rest. My mother needed cash fast, which meant she had set the reserve price low to guarantee a quick sale. A low reserve is a door left open. I intended to walk through it. Right in the middle of all that planning, Brooke called to gloat. She had put a deposit down on a new SUV, loaded, third row, the works. She was paying for it out of her share of Rose's estate, money that hadn't even cleared yet. I asked mildly whether that was wise before the sale closed. That's when she said it, breezy as anything. "Oh, come on. If Grandma had left it to you, you'd just waste it on that dusty little office." There it was again, the same sentence in a slightly different dress. I felt the old urge to defend myself, to list every appointment and every form. I didn't. I had finally learned that you don't explain your worth to people who have already decided you don't have any. So I just said, "We'll see." Patricia Howe's office smelled like old paper and good coffee. She was a trim woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and a handshake that meant it. I put my license on her desk. She looked at it, then at me, and something in her shoulders eased. "You look like her," she said. Then she opened a file to inches thick. 2 years ago, she told me, Rose had come to her deliberate and clear-headed and drafted a will. It was signed, witnessed by 2 of Patricia's staff, and notarized properly. In it, Rose left the farmhouse and the surrounding 10 acres to me, to Clara, the one who stayed. Patricia read it aloud, and I had to look at the window for a moment. Then I told her about Vincent's version, about the steady signature on a dying woman, the 3 weeks before date, the kitchen table reading. Patricia's expression went flat and professional, which is how lawyers look when they are furious. "I drafted the operative will," she said. "Nobody contacted me about revocation." She tapped the file. "If your cousin's document is what you suspect, then the will currently in probate is fraudulent, and everything done under it can be challenged." I asked where the original signed copy of Rose's real will was. Patricia had a conformed copy in her file, but the executed original Rose had insisted on keeping herself in her safe deposit box at the Cedar Hollow Bank, and access to that box, Patricia said, would require the key and the documentation Rose had set aside. A key, a box. I felt the cold tin of a recipe box against my memory. The next morning I drove out to the farmhouse. The estate company hadn't locked it yet. I let myself in, and the smell hit me first. Lavender, and wood smoke and her. I went straight to the kitchen, to the shelf above the stove where the tin recipe box had lived my whole life. I took the small key from my coat pocket, the one she had pressed into my hand in February, and it fit. Inside, under an index card stained with decades of gravy and pie, I found two things. The first was a flat brass key in a small envelope marked in her handwriting, Cedar Hollow Bank, Box 114. The second was a sealed letter with my name on the front in her looping cursive. Just Clara. I stood in that kitchen holding both, and my hands, which never shook. I carried the letter round for 3 days without opening it. Some truths, once you let them out, you can't fold back up. I think part of me knew that whatever she had written would ask something of me, and I wanted to be strong enough to do it before I read what it was. 2 days later, Patricia and I opened safe deposit box 114 at the Cedar Hollow Bank. Rose had added me to the box as Cola years earlier, so I could open it without waiting on any court. Inside was a slim folder, and inside that the executed original of her real will. Signatures and seals intact, witnessed and dated 2 years back. Patricia laid it beside a copy of Vincent's version on the bank's little conference table. She pointed out the dates, the witness lines, which on Vincent's copy named to people no one could quite locate, and the signature itself. They almost always make the same mistake, she said. They try too hard to look perfect. A genuine signature from a sick woman wobbles. This one marches. She explained the path forward. We could file to reopen the probate, present the original will, and allege fraud. But she warned that road was slow. Months, maybe a year, with my family fighting every step. And in the meantime, the auction would happen on schedule. So we fight on to fronts, I said. She raised an eyebrow. I told her my plan. Form the company, buy the house clean at auction, then pursue the fraud case to make the rest of the truth land where it belonged. Patricia took off her glasses, looked at me for a long moment, and almost smiled. Your grandmother, she said, would have liked that very much. The night before I opened Rose's letter, I finally sat at my kitchen table and slid my thumb under the seal. Her handwriting filled 2 pages. Steady where her last forged signature had been suspiciously steadier. She wrote like she talked. No wasted words. She told me she knew. She knew Sharon was underwater. Knew about the second mortgage and the failed ventures. Knew that when she was gone, there would be hands reaching for the house before the flowers wilted. I've watched it coming for years, she wrote. Your mother loves money the way some people love whiskey, and she will tell herself any story to get it. Then she told me what she had done, the real will in the bank box with Patricia's name on it. The house left to me on purpose in writing, and then the line I have read so many times I could recite it in my sleep. If they ever tell you that you were never in my will, you put this letter on the table and you let the paper speak. Don't fight them with shouting, Clara. You were never any good at it, and it isn't your strength. Numbers are your strength. Quiet is your strength. The house goes to the one who stayed. That's you. It was always you. Then the ugly, hiccuping kind of crying arrived. The kind that comes when someone reaches out from past death and tells you they saw you all along. Then I wiped my face, folded the letter back along its worn creases, and put it somewhere safe. Because now I wasn't just buying back a house. I was carrying out the last clear instruction of the only person who ever believed me. Let the papers speak. The auction was held on a cold October morning in the county building in a meeting room, with folding chairs and burnt coffee. I didn't go in person. That was the whole point. Instead, I sent a calm associate from Patricia's office there to represent Cedar Hollow Holdings, with my hard limit written on a card in his pocket. I sat in my car in the parking lot with my phone in my hand and my heart in my throat. My mother and Brooke were inside. I had seen them go in dressed up, already celebrating. Bidding open low, just like I had predicted. The reserve was set cheap for a fast sale. Then it climbed. A local farmer wanting the acreage, an investor from the city, and the quiet man in the good suit who kept raising the company's number, patient as a Tuesday. The price passed 200,000. 220. My family, I learned later, was thrilled. Every raise was more cash for them, and they had no idea who was driving it up or why. At 238,000, the room went still. The gavel came down, and the farmhouse on Cedar Hollow Road belonged to Cedar Hollow Holdings LLC. My phone buzzed. Sold to your company. Congratulations, Miss Finch. I sat in that cold car and pressed my hand over my mouth and made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. My mother walked out of that building a few minutes later, beaming, counting money in her head, complaining to Brooke about that pushy company that had bid them up. She passed within 30 feet of my car and never looked over. She thought she had sold her mother-in-law's house to a stranger for top dollar. She had no idea she had just sold it back to the granddaughter she swore was never in the will. The money moved the way money moves when people are desperate to spend it. My mother took the largest share, and most of it went straight to the second mortgage and debts she had been hiding from my father for years. Brooke finished paying off her SUV and booked a vacation. They divided the proceeds at a celebration dinner I wasn't invited to, which suited me fine, because every dollar they passed across that table was a dollar I had paid. I sat in my office above the hardware store the night the funds cleared, and laid the new deed on my desk under the lamp. Cedar Hollow Holdings LLC, owner of record, the farmhouse and 10 acres on Cedar Hollow Road. My company, my house, my grandmother's house, back where it belonged, and not one of them knew. On Christmas Eve, my father came to me for the first time in my life. He came up the stairs slow, hat in his hands, and stood in my doorway looking older than I had ever seen him. Your grandmother, he started, then stopped. He tried again. There were papers I signed as part of the probate. He turned the hat in his hands. I didn't read them close. I should have read them close. It was as near to a confession as Raymond Finch had in him. Vincent put it in front of me, he said finally. Your mother said it was just formalities. I knew something wasn't right about it. I signed anyway. He stood there longer, hoping I would make it easier for him, hoping I would say it was all right. I didn't, because it wasn't. I know you did, Dad, I said. He flinched like I had struck him, put his hat back on, and went down the stairs. I watched his taillights disappear and thought, tomorrow you'll learn the rest. Christmas Day I dressed in the plain sweater Rose would have approved of, and drove to my parents' house. I made the drive I had made 1,000 times, and I was calm in a way that surprised me. The folder sat in my purse on the passenger seat. I thought about Rose teaching me to add the columns out loud at her kitchen table. Numbers don't lie, Clara. People do. I parked behind Brooke's enormous new SUV, the one she had bought with my money, and sat for one breath with my hands on the wheel. Then I picked up my purse, felt the corner of the folder press against my palm, and walked up the path to the door. The dining room was warm and bright and smelled like a holiday should, pine and roast and cinnamon. My mother had outdone herself, the good china out, candles lit, a centerpiece of red and gold. My father sat at the foot of the table, quiet. Brooke and her husband sat near the middle, already a glass of wine in. My uncle and his wife were there, and to my private satisfaction, Vincent, sweating slightly in a sweater, parked near the end like a man who wanted to be close to the door. My mother presided at the head, glowing, refilling glasses. Queen of a kingdom she thought was secure. She greeted me with a hug that was all performance and seated me on her right, the place of honor, so everyone could see how gracious she was being to the difficult daughter. I led her. I complimented the table. I passed the rolls. I was by every account a perfectly pleasant dinner guest. We ate, we toasted, and then between the main course and the pie, my mother tapped her glass with her fork and said she had a little announcement. A bit of family news worth celebrating. I just want to say, she began, what a hard year it's been losing Mother Finch. She pressed a hand to her chest. But we got through it together as a family. And I'm happy to share that we finally closed the sale of her house last month. It's done. We can all move forward now. Glasses lifted around the table. Then my mother's eyes slid to me, and the smirk came out. The one I had been waiting for. The one that needed an audience to work. I know that's been a sore spot for some, she said lightly, swirling her wine and looking right at me. But honestly, sweetheart, you were never in the will anyway. There's no shame in it. Grandma just knew who'd handle things responsibly. A few uncomfortable chuckles. The table waited to see if I would cry or argue or slink off. I set down my fork. I didn't reach for my folder yet. I just looked at my mother and let a small silence stretch. The kind that makes confident people start to wonder. Brooke, who never could stand a silence, rushed to fill it. She laughed, that bright, careless laugh she had since we were kids, and lifted her glass toward me. Don't feel bad, Clara. Honestly, it's for the best. You'd just have wasted it. There it was again, the second knife, set in front of everyone on Christmas with a smile, like it was something you could say to your sister between the turkey and the pie. I picked up my napkin, folded it, and set it beside my plate, slow and deliberate, the way Rose used to when she had decided a conversation was finished. Then I reached for my wine and took one unhurried sip while the table watched. Then I set the glass down and asked my mother a simple question in the same pleasant voice I had used about the rolls. Can I ask who you sold it to? She blinked, thrown by how calm I was. The house, I said. Who bought it? She recovered because she loved telling this part. Some company, she said with a little wave. Cedar Hollow Holdings, I think. An investment outfit. They bid us up nicely, actually. Paid well over what we expected. She smiled around the table, collecting her admiration. So really it worked out for everyone. Cedar Hollow Holdings, I repeated, like I was making sure I had it right. That's right, she said. Why? I felt the whole strange year arrive at this single point. The funeral and the forged will and the cold car in the auction parking lot. I reached into my purse and my hand closed around the leather folder, and I brought it up and set it on the table beside my plate. I opened the folder and took out the first page. This is the deed to Grandma's house, I said, and laid it in the center of the table. Turned so my mother could read it. Recorded the day of the auction. She glanced down, impatient. Then her eyes caught on the owner's name and stopped. Cedar Hollow Holdings, LLC. I don't understand, she said, but her voice had changed. I took out the second page. "This is Grandma's will," I said. "Her real one. Drafted 2 years ago by Patricia Howe. Signed, witnessed, and notarized properly. It leaves the farmhouse and 10 acres to me by name." The color was leaving my mother's face now, draining down like someone had pulled a plug. Brooke leaned in to read and went quiet. Vincent pushed his chair back from the table. I took out the third page last and held it for a moment before I set it down. Because this one was hers, in her hand. "And this," I said, "is the letter she left me, the one that told me exactly what you'd do." The table had gone so quiet I could hear the candles. Every eye moved from the papers to my mother to me. I folded my hands and let them look. My mother looked up from the papers and for once in her life had nothing to say. So I said it for her in a voice as level as a countertop. "Cool. I hope you enjoy the cash. A beat, since I'm the one who bought it." The words landed soft and detonated slow. "Cedar Hollow Holdings is mine," I said. "I formed it. I bid on it. The money you all spent this fall, the mortgage payments, the SUV, the vacation, that was my money. I bought Grandma's house back from you, and not one of you noticed." My mother's mouth opened and closed. Then she found her voice, and it came out the way I knew it would. "That's a lie," she said, half standing, her wine tipping and bleeding across the white cloth. "That's not true. Vincent, tell her. Tell her that will isn't real." But Vincent was already on his feet, gray as ash, backing toward the door, muttering that he had to go, that he wasn't part of this. I didn't raise my voice. I just put one hand flat on Rose's letter and looked at my mother across the ruined tablecloth. "You said I was never in the will," I said. "You were right, because the one I was in you replaced. And I have the original." The candles burned. Nobody moved. The table went silent, not the polite silence of a lull, but the deep ringing silence of a room where everyone has understood something at the same instant, and no one wants to be the first to speak. Brooke had gone the color of the tablecloth. I watched her do the arithmetic, watched it cross her face as she realized the giant SUV in the driveway had been bought with money that was about to be clawed back. My father had his eyes shut, and I looked at my sister, who had laughed and said I would waste it, and I gave her the only answer that mattered. "Turns out I didn't waste it," I said quietly. "I bought back the only thing in this family that was ever worth keeping, somewhere in the kitchen." The oven timer went off for the second pie, cheerful and absurd, and nobody got up to answer it. I didn't stay for pie. I gathered my 3 pages back into their folder, thanked my mother for dinner with a courtesy that landed harder than any insult, and drove home through the Christmas lights with my hands steady on the wheel. The rest happened the way Patricia said it would, just faster, because a lie cracks quickest once everyone can see it. She filed the petition to reopen probate the first business day after the holiday. We presented the original will and the evidence of the forgery, and the court took it seriously. Vincent's notary commission came under review within weeks. Faced with losing his license and worse, he stopped pretending he had done anything proper, and the document he had notarized fell apart under the first real scrutiny. With the fraudulent will discredited, the court reopened the estate under Rose's real will, the one that left the house to me. My purchase at the public auction stood on its own. I had bought it at arm's length, at market price, as an honest buyer. What got unwound was the money. The cash my family had split came out of an estate they had emptied with a forged document, and the court ordered it returned. My mother, who had already spent her share covering the debts she had hidden for years, now owed it back with nowhere to get it, and the whole careful image she had built for the town came down in public, which to her was the worst part of all. Brooke had to sell the new SUV to scrape together her piece of what was owed. My father moved into the spare room. I kept the house both ways. The auction had made me the owner. The real will made me the heir. To different roads, the same front door. That spring I drove out to Cedar Hollow Road, fixed the crooked porch swing, and turned the soil in Rose's garden with my own hands. Old Mr. Peters came by with tomato starts and didn't say much, which was its own kind of blessing. I left the door open for my father once, with a single condition. It's open, I told him. When you're ready to be honest. He hasn't come yet. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. Either way, the garden is in, and the swing creaks the way it always did. Here is the thing I learned sitting in that quiet house that used to be hers. Family can vote you out of the story all they want, but the people who actually stay are the ones who get to keep the house, and the name, and the truth. That is where I will leave it. The smirk, the toast, the 3 pieces of paper on the Christmas tablecloth. If you have ever been the one who stayed while others showed up only to collect, then this story was for you.